I came to Quakers after I'd been working in Africa, and I'd been in a small country called Lesotho, and I'd realised the violence that's done to people when they are hungry, and there's no equality in their lives. The violence is done both systematically and individually. I was looking at how development worked and how unsatisfactory some of it was. I came back to England. I went to a Quaker meeting house. I sat there and thought, aha, this is for me. It appealed to me because we had no priests. Women were equal. We met in silence. We decided we couldn't name God because it was such a different image to everyone's mind. So we wouldn't even discuss, what God was. So today in Quakers we have Buddhists and I think theists and humanitarians, and we have a wide range of people, but we all subscribe to certain testimonies. So just to go back a little bit, in the 17th century in England, 450 years ago, the country was running a desperate civil war. It was bloody and it was shocking. People were dismembered and they were killed. It was between royalty and the Commonwealth. And in the midst of this, there was a Quaker named George Fox who said, religion's part of this and killing's part of this, and I am going to ask people to join together and refuse to kill. Now that was subversive. You're not allowed to not be in the military or not kill. So George Fox and his partner wrote to Margaret Fell, wrote to King Charles and said, we are loyal citizens, but we will not carry a sword. We will not kill. We do not believe in taking outward lives. And this became the first peace testimony. So when I came back to Australia in about 1982, the Vietnam War was still active. We went and did training in non-violent protest. We all went down to Kangaroo Valley, and we were almost like revolutionaries there. We were learning whether we would resist and get arrested, whether we would resist and get charged, whether we wouldn't resist, who would replace us, who would look after people, what statements we would make to the police, but never with violence. Never, ever with violence. And so those early means of non-violence, some of them came out of America with people like George Lakey, who's a Quaker, and others who were running similar campaigns. The Quaker meeting house in Sydney on Friday nights had lawyers who were telling people who didn't want to go to the Vietnam War but were called up in the ballot whether they were legally entitled to conscientious objection. If I can look at it in the longer view, we take it pieces hard and that we have to work over a long time. So if you look at slavery and abolishing the business of slavery, didn't altogether abolish ownership immediately. That took nearly 100 years. And it's the strangest story. 12 Quaker people got together one day somewhere in London, little room upstairs, probably a meeting house, and said, we've got to abolish this iniquity that's slavery. One human. They spent the next 100 years succeeded by others in small groups who visited churches, visited MPs, talked to MPs, wrote petitions, carried out, often put their lives on the line. If slaves were being sold, they'd intervene there non-violently, and they worked for 100 years on that. So there's a range of strategies and techniques, but what happens, someone sits in the silence and then they feel a concern arise to work in some field. Now, I have a concern for refugees in a special field. Someone else might have a concern for stopping AUKUS, for example. First of all, it's budgetarily unbalanced. Secondly, it builds war. Thirdly, it's going to cause distress and killing. And so what we have is people working on that. A recent Quaker initiative is to employ a peace worker to work with MPs in the Australian Federal Parliament. And already we've had a question asked by one MP on whether Australian parts are used in Israeli planes to bomb Lebanon or Iran or Gaza. Recently I was at a protest outside the American consulate in Melbourne with 40 others sitting in silence for an hour with signs saying peace for Palestine, peace for Israel. So we're very keen to distinguish between the Jewish people and the Israeli government. And we will protest the Israeli government until things change. I think where a lot of Quaker work's been picked up by others. So Oxfam was a Quaker initiative, handed over. Amnesty International, Quaker initiative, handed over. Divesting your money from anywhere where it's doing damage means that the Quaker yearly meeting has no funds in any bank that is destroying forests, human lives through work and trafficking, mining, I think, and arms. We have a long history of non-violent action for peace, and some of it's creative. So the knitting nanas were often really informed way back when they sat at the gates in Alice Springs and knitted by people like Helen Bayes and other Quakers who actually dressed in Quaker dress and went back and sat there, and we have to say, they said, we have to tell the people at this base that this American base in Alice Springs is doing harm in the world. And not just militarism, it was spying on India, and that shows we had no integrity as a country. So the campaign against the arms trade was started by David Johnson, and we prevented two arms trades being held in Australia. Looking again at, how we use our money, we're saying look at what you do with your money and know where it goes and what damage it's doing. The acts are often imaginative, they're non-violent, but we also train in non-violent. So things like non-violent language, non-violent behaviour, body behaviour becomes part of helping us, and I'm speaking personally, to be less threatening or violent in our lives, become aware of the gift that life is, whether it's for a worm or a tree or a person, and consistently be there through imaginative, creative, as well as well-known, tried and true methods for achieving peace in all the different realms of society.